Gym bullies hide behind faded belts and gym rules. They feed on the weak, masked by the guise of training. But what happens when a predator accidentally pulls a real monster onto the mats? This isn't about sport. It's a brutal lesson in respect and survival. Martial arts gyms like to preach about family, honor, and mutual benefit. It's a nice narrative. It looks good on the website and sells memberships to software engineers and accountants looking for an outlet. But anyone who spends enough time on the mats knows the truth. A gym is a hierarchy, and at the top, ego is the ultimate currency. The mat room at Apex Grappling smelled of bleached canvas, old sweat, and damp athletic tape. The fluorescent lights hummed a low, steady drone over the evening class. Sarah sat on the edge of the mat, adjusting the lapels of her white gi. She was 26, a blue belt who had spent 2 years grinding through the aches, the bruises, and the frustration that came with learning how to survive against larger opponents. She wasn't naturally athletic. She was there for the grit, trying to build a version of herself that didn't flinch when the world pushed back. She tied her belt, pulling the knot tight, and looked across the room. Derek was holding court. He always was. He was a second-degree black belt, a heavy-set man in his mid-30s with a cauliflower ear and a permanent smirk. Derek didn't teach classes. He just showed up to spar. He treated the gym like his personal kingdom, a place where he could be a god among mortals. He had a reputation. He went too hard with the lower belts, specifically the smaller ones. He was the kind of guy who disguised his bullying as tough love, claiming he was preparing people for the real world. Nobody called him out. He was friends with the owner. And in the strange tribal politics of a dojo, a black belt's rank was a shield against accountability. "All right, partner up. 6-minute rounds," the instructor yelled, clapping his hands. Sarah stood, scanning the room for another blue belt. Before she could make eye contact with anyone, a heavy hand clapped her on the shoulder. "Let's go, Sarah. Your turn," Derek said. It wasn't a request. Her stomach tightened. Rolling with Derek wasn't training. It was surviving an ego trip. "Sure, Derek." They slapped hands and bumped fists. The timer buzzed. Derek didn't bother with technique. He relied on his 80-pound weight advantage. Within 10 seconds, he bypassed her guard, shoving her legs aside with lazy contempt, and dropped his entire body weight onto her chest. The breath exploded out of Sarah's lungs in a sharp hiss. She framed her forearms against his collarbones, trying to create an inch of space. It was like trying to bench press a parked car. Derek smiled, a small, patronizing curl of the lips. He wasn't sweating. He took his time, methodically isolating her right arm. Sarah bridged hard, trying to buck him off, but he floated over her hips, pinning her flat. "Too slow," he muttered. He slid his knee onto her stomach. The pain was immediate and sharp. Sarah gasped, her core muscles burning as she tried to defend her ribs. As soon as her hands dropped to deal with the knee, Derek's thick forearm slid across her throat. His other hand grabbed the collar of her GI, setting up a cross-collar choke. He didn't ease into it. He snapped it tight with a violent jerking motion. The pressure crushed her trachea and clamped down on her carotid arteries. The panic was instantaneous. It wasn't the slow, methodical squeeze of a partner practicing a move. It was mean. It was a punishment. Sarah's hand slammed against the mat. Tap, tap, tap. Derek didn't let go. She tapped again, harder, frantically slapping his shoulder. Tap, tap, tap. He adjusted his grip, pulling tighter. He drove his forehead into the mat, locking his arms out. The room began to narrow. The hum of the fluorescent lights faded into a loud, rushing static in Sarah's ears. Her lungs screamed for air, but her throat was crushed shut. She kicked her legs, no longer doing jujitsu, just a human animal, thrashing in pure, unadulterated terror. The edges of her vision turned dark gray, then black. A strange, terrifying warmth flooded the back of her neck. "He's going to kill me." That was her last coherent thought before her limbs went slack. A second later, the pressure vanished. Air rushed back into Sarah's lungs with a harsh, ragged wheeze. She curled onto her side, coughing violently, her chest heaving. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from the raw, physiological shock of oxygen deprivation. Her throat felt bruised, a deep, throbbing ache radiating down to her collarbones. Derek stood up, tying his belt with practiced nonchalance. He looked down at her. "You got to tap earlier, Sarah. Don't let your ego get in the way. In a real fight, nobody stops." He said it loudly, ensuring the two adjacent pairs of grapplers heard him. Sarah pushed herself up onto her elbows, still coughing. She felt humiliated, stripped bare. She had tapped. She had tapped immediately. He knew it. She knew it. But in the tribal hierarchy of the gym, no one had seen a thing. The adjacent pairs kept their heads down, pretending they hadn't heard her frantic slapping on the mat. Derek turned away, looking around the room for his next victim. "Who's next?" he called out, cracking his knuckles. "I am." The voice came from the edge of the mats. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive, but it cut through the dull roar of the gym like a scalpel. Cole uncrossed his arms and stepped away from the cinder block wall near the entrance. He wasn't a member of Apex Grappling. He was just Sarah's older brother, a man who had driven down from San Diego to help her move apartments that weekend. He'd arrived 10 minutes early to pick her up, standing quietly in the shadows by the cubbies. He wore a plain black rash guard and a pair of gray athletic shorts. At first glance, he didn't look like much. He was lean, hovering around 180 pounds, no cauliflower ear, no flashy gym apparel. But there was a stillness to him, the kind of absolute, terrifying calm that only belongs to men who have done violence for a living. For the last 10 years, Cole had worn a trident on his chest. He didn't train sport jiu-jitsu to win plastic medals on the weekends. He trained combatives to eliminate threats in the dark. He stepped over the red boundary line onto the mat. His bare feet made no sound. Derek turned, sizing him up with a dismissive glance. "Sorry, buddy. Class is full. Open mat is on Saturdays." "She tapped," Cole said. He didn't raise his voice. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides. He walked until he was standing 5 feet from Derek. "She tapped, and you held it for 4 seconds. You put her to sleep on purpose." The surrounding grapplers stopped moving. The squeak of limbs on canvas ceased. The gym went dead silent. Derek's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before returning harder and uglier. His ego was on the line now. "It's a contact sport, man. People get caught. Maybe she shouldn't be on the mats if she can't handle the pressure." "Maybe," Cole said softly. He didn't break eye contact. His eyes were entirely dead. There was no anger in them, just calculation. "Let's see how you handle it." Derek let out a short, barking laugh. He looked at the other students, playing to his audience. "You want a round? You even know how to grapple, tough guy?" Cole didn't answer. He just stepped forward, raising his hands to his chest. "All right," Derek said, dropping into a wide, aggressive stance. "Timer's running. Let's go." Derek shot forward, reaching aggressively for a collar tie, intending to snap Cole's head down and bully him to the mat. Cole didn't backpedal. He didn't try to strip the grip. As Derek's heavy hand clamped onto his neck, Cole stepped inside the arc of the man's reach. It happened faster than anyone in the room could process. Cole's left hand shot up, securing an underhook, digging deep into Derek's armpit. His right hand cupped Derek's tricep. Cole dropped his center of gravity, perfectly sinking his hips under Derek's belt line. There was no strain, no grunting, just the precise, explosive application of leverage. Cole popped his hips. Derek's 210-pound frame left the ground. His legs kicked helplessly in the empty air. Derek slammed onto the mat, flat on his back. The impact literally shook the floorboards beneath the canvas. Before Derek could even exhale, Cole was on him. This wasn't jiu-jitsu, as Derek knew it. There were no intricate guard passes or playful scrambles. Cole bypassed Derek's legs entirely, dropping his full weight into a crossface from side control. Cole's shoulder drove brutally into Derek's jawline, turning his head sharply to the left. Derek grunted in pain. He planted his feet and bridged wildly, trying to buck the lighter man off. But Cole felt like a block of cement. He didn't ride high. He sank his hips low, heavy, and completely unbothered by the thrashing beneath him. "Get off!" Derek gasped, his face turning a mottled red. He framed his hands against Cole's neck, trying to push him away. Cole methodically stripped Derek's framing arm. He pinned Derek's left wrist to the mat with his own knee, effectively neutralizing half of the black belt's defense. Then Cole shifted his weight higher, placing his sternum directly over Derek's diaphragm. Every time Derek exhaled, Cole settled deeper, taking the space. It took 30 seconds for the psychological break to begin. Derek was used to imposing his will. He was used to being the hammer. Now, trapped beneath a guy who felt 30 pounds heavier than he actually was, panic started to set in. Derek's mouth opened. He started gasping for air, his breath hitching. Cole wasn't looking at him. He stared blankly at the far wall, breathing slowly and exclusively through his nose. He was completely at rest, while the man beneath him was fighting for his life. Derek thrashed again, burning precious oxygen. In his desperation, he exposed his right arm, extending it to try to push Cole's face away. Cole moved with terrifying fluidity. He caught the wrist, slid his left leg over Derek's face, and locked his hips down into a pristine armbar. But he didn't crank it. He didn't hyperextend the joint to snap the ligament. Not yet. He held it at the absolute edge of breaking. The joint was straight. The tendons in Derek's elbow creaked. Derek's eyes widened in sheer panic. He slammed his left hand against the mat. Tap, tap, tap. Cole looked down at him. His face was a mask of cold stone. He didn't let go. Derek slapped the mat harder, frantically, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "Tap! I tap! Let go!" 1 second. Derek let out a choked sob of genuine terror. 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Cole finally released the grip. He stood up in one smooth motion, not even breathing heavily. He looked down at the black belt, who was curled into a fetal position, clutching his arm and gasping for breath, completely stripped of his armor. "In a real fight," Cole said, his voice carrying clearly across the dead silent gym, "nobody stops." The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. It possessed a physical weight, pressing down on the 30-odd people standing frozen on the canvas. Nobody rushed to help Derek. Nobody offered him a hand. They just stared, their eyes darting between the second-degree black belt curled on the floor and the stranger standing over him in plain athletic shorts. The hierarchy of the room had just been completely dismantled in less than a minute. Derek scrambled backward, his sweaty back sliding against the padded cinder-block wall. His right arm hung awkwardly at his side. He cradled his elbow against his ribs, his chest heaving violently. The sheer, unadulterated panic that had gripped him moments before was slowly receding, replaced by the hot, toxic flush of humiliation. His ego, severely bruised and bleeding out in front of his audience, demanded a reaction. He needed to salvage his identity. "You son of a bitch!" Derek spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of pain and rage. "You cranked it! You came in here off the street and cranked a submission. That's assault! I could have the cops here in 5 minutes." Cole didn't flinch. He didn't shift his weight. He just looked at Derek the way a man looks at a stubborn stain on the pavement. There was no triumph in his posture, no chest puffing. "Call them," Cole said, his voice flat. "Tell them you put a blood choke on a 26-year-old girl, ignored her tapping for 3 seconds, and put her to sleep because your feelings were hurt. I'll wait right here." Derek opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked around the room, silently begging for someone, anyone, to back him up. The software engineers, the accountants, The blue and purple belts, who usually laughed at his terrible jokes, all looked away. They suddenly found the texture of the floor mats incredibly interesting. "What the hell's going on here?" The voice boomed from the back office. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Greg marched out. Greg was the gym owner and head instructor. He was a man in his late 40s with thick cauliflower ears, a barrel chest, and a black belt heavily frayed at the edges, adorned with 4 red stripes. He moved with the heavy planted steps of a man who owned the ground he walked on. Greg pushed through the crowd of students, taking in the scene. He saw Sarah sitting near the wall, pale and massaging her throat. He saw Derek nursing his arm against the padding, and he saw Cole, standing perfectly still in the center of the mat. Greg knew exactly what Derek was. Every head coach knows who the gym bullies are. But Derek paid a premium membership, bought all the expensive gym merchandise, and brought in his meathead friends who paid their dues on time. In the brutal economics of running a martial arts school in a strip mall, morals often took a back seat to rent money. Greg had spent 3 years looking the other way. Now the mess had landed right in the middle of his pristine mats. "Who are you?" Greg demanded, stopping 3 feet from Cole. He crossed his thick arms over his chest. "You don't walk into my gym, interrupt my class, and assault my students. I don't care what you think you saw." Cole finally broke his gaze away from Derek and looked at the older man. "I didn't think I saw anything. I watched your student hold a choke on my sister until she lost consciousness. If you're running this room, that makes you complicit." Greg's jaw tightened. The veins in his thick neck pulsed. The accusation stung because it was entirely accurate, but a gym owner cannot lose face in front of his paying customers. The illusion of absolute authority had to be maintained at all costs. "This is a combat sport," Greg said, his voice hardening, adopting the tired cliché defense of gym enforcers everywhere. "Accidents happen. We push the pace here. If she can't handle the heat, she shouldn't be training. But we don't tolerate street thugs walking in and trying to act tough." "Tough?" Cole repeated. A dark, hollow amusement flickered in his eyes. He looked around the room, taking in the bright fluorescent lights, the spotless mats, the motivational posters plastered on the walls. It was a sterile laboratory, a playground where adults came to pretend they were warriors, secure in the knowledge that they could tap out whenever they got uncomfortable. "You think this is tough?" Cole said softly, turning his attention back to Greg. "You put padding on the floor. You establish rules. You put a timer on the wall, and you convince yourselves you're dangerous. You let bullies prey on the weak because the environment protects them from real consequences." Cole took a half step forward. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I don't play sport, Greg. Where I operate, there are no timers. There are no referees. And when you make a mistake, you don't get to tap the mat and go home to your family. You bleed out in the dirt. So don't talk to me about handling the heat." Greg's face flushed dark red. The disrespect was unbearable. His ego, built on 20 years of local tournament wins and the reverence of his students, demanded blood. He reached down and untied the knot of his heavy black belt, dropping it onto the mat. He pulled his GI top off, tossing it aside, revealing a tight, sweat-stained rash guard. "You think you're a killer?" Greg snarled, dropping his chin, his stance widening. "You think you can come in here and disrespect my mats? Let's see what you've got against someone who actually knows how to fight. 5 minutes. Just you and me." Sarah pushed herself up off the wall, her voice raspy and panicked. "Cole, don't. He's a 4th-degree black belt. He's a former national champion." Cole didn't look back at her. He didn't take off his shirt. He didn't stretch. He simply raised his hands, keeping his palms open and relaxed, his eyes locking onto Greg with the cold, mechanical detachment of a predator locking onto its prey. "Put 5 minutes on the clock," Cole said. The buzzer echoed through the silent gym, a sharp electronic shriek that signaled the start of the round. Greg didn't waste a second. He was aggressive, fueled by pride and a desperate need to reassert his dominance. He shot forward with an explosive double-leg takedown, driving his shoulder squarely into Cole's midsection. He expected Cole to sprawl, to fight the hands, to engage in the familiar, rhythmic dance of grappling. Instead, Cole simply absorbed the impact. He let Greg drive him backward, willingly falling to the mat, pulling Greg directly into his closed guard. For a brief second, Greg felt a surge of triumph. He was on top. He was in control. He immediately began framing his forearms against Cole's ribs, trying to posture up and pass the guard. But the moment Greg shifted his weight, the reality of the situation rapidly, fundamentally altered. Cole wasn't playing jiu-jitsu. He wasn't looking for a sweep or a flashy submission. He reached up, bypassing Greg's arms entirely, and wrapped both of his hands around the back of Greg's neck. He locked his fingers together into a vice grip and pulled Greg's head down, burying the man's face directly into his chest. Simultaneously, Cole locked his legs tightly around Greg's waist, crossing his ankles and extending his hips upward. It was an overhook tie-up, a basic stalling position in sport grappling, but Cole applied it with terrifying, suffocating intent. Greg's neck was forced into a severe, unnatural angle. His nose was smashed into Cole's sternum. He couldn't breathe through his mouth, and the thick fabric of Cole's rash guard blocked his nasal passages. Panic flared in Greg's chest. He planted his hands on the mat and pushed with all his might, trying to force his head up. Cole didn't muscle him down. He simply adjusted his angle, using skeletal leverage rather than brute strength. Every time Greg pushed, Cole yielded slightly, only to snap him back down the moment the older man exhaled. 30 seconds in, Greg was already breathing heavily, the adrenaline dumping into his bloodstream. He couldn't see. He couldn't breathe properly. He threw a heavy forearm strike across Cole's jaw, a blatant foul, an act of sheer desperation. Cole didn't even blink. He took the strike, absorbed it, and used the opening to uncross his legs. In a blur of motion, Cole elevated his hips, caught Greg's left arm, and swept him seamlessly onto his back. The reversal was so fast, Greg didn't even have time to brace for the impact. Before Greg could establish a defensive frame, Cole settled into side control, but he didn't hold the position the way an athlete does. He dropped his hips. He made himself incredibly heavy, isolating Greg's head and arm. Cole drove the point of his shoulder directly into the soft tissue just below Greg's jawline, the crossface. "You watched," Cole whispered.